Welcome. We are uh, examining a really substantial stack of source materials today, documenting a truly tragic and profoundly complex legal case that unfolded in Strongsville, Ohio.
That's right. He was back in the summer of 2022.
Now, we've been sifting through court records, police reports, and, quite a bit of media analysis that's all focused on the vehicular homicide case involving Mackenzie Shirilla. It was an event that really became a national flashpoint.
Our mission here is to guide you through a meticulous factual examination of these sources.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to cover the volatile relationship background, the critical incident timeline, the intensive investigation, and of course the court proceedings.
Right.
Crucially, we are tracing the specific legal and evidentiary progression that allowed the authorities and ultimately the judge to legally define this catastrophic event not as an accident.
Which is how it might have looked at first.
Exactly. Not as an accident, but as an act of premeditated murder.
And before we get into the technicalities of the evidence, we absolutely must pause to acknowledge the immense human cost here.
Absolutely.
This case is defined by the profound loss of two young lives. Dominic Russo, who was 20 years old, and Davion Flanagan, who was just 19. Our deepest sympathy goes out to their families who had to navigate not only this horrific sudden loss, but also the agonizing and very public legal battle that followed.
And just to set the scene with the outcome, the sources confirmed that on July 31st, 2022, Mackenzie Shirilla, who was 17 at the time, intentionally steered her 2018 Toyota Camry at a very high speed directly into a brick wall.
And her passengers.
Her boyfriend, Dominic Russo, and their friend, Davion Flanagan, who were both passengers, were killed instantly.
The legal conclusion was definitive and severe. Shirilla was found guilty of multiple counts, including murder and felonious assault. That ruling that this was calculated, premeditated murder is a conclusion that really requires us to examine every single piece of evidence presented.
And that's precisely where we'll begin our examination.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the people involved, because understanding the dynamics between them is, well, it's foundational to establishing the prosecution's argument on motive.
We have to first profile Mackenzie Shirilla. At the time of the crash, she's 17 years old, a recent graduate of Strongsville High School.
Okay.
And the source materials dedicate substantial attention to her social profile, noting her visibility on platforms like TikTok.
She had a big following, didn't she?
A very large follower count. Some sources suggest thousands. And she was actively posting these lifestyle and fashion videos. She was even receiving product samples for review. She was essentially functioning as a local micro-influencer.
That level of public visibility is important context. Her persona was a topic of discussion among her peers. Sources indicate she had a significant, almost clique-like influence at school, reportedly drawing a large following of girls.
Mm-hmm.
But what's particularly noteworthy, and what the prosecution later used to frame her controlling nature, was the consistent report that she admired and often imitated the character Regina George from the movie Mean Girls.
Right, the ultimate controller.
Exactly. This detail suggests a young woman who highly valued social dominance and, control over her environment and her relationships.
And that image of control is absolutely central to the tragedy. Her primary relationship was with Dominic Russo, who was 20. He was an entrepreneur, owned several small businesses.
So he was a bit older, already establishing himself.
Yes. The couple had been together for 4 years, starting when she was in high school, and they had been living together since 2021. However, and this is key, the sources consistently describe their relationship as highly volatile.
Volatile is the word that just keeps coming up in the records.
It is. Russo's brother confirmed a pattern of intense conflict, frequent breakups, and then these equally frequent strange reunions. It was a cycle.
And this pattern of instability, it escalated dramatically in the months just before the crash. This gave the prosecution the evidence they needed to argue intent rather than just a tragic accident.
It did.
So what specific allegations detailing this rising tension were documented in the sources?
Well, Dominic's mother, Christine Russo, provided some really key testimony regarding the conflict. She stated that over the 6 months leading up to the crash, the tension had become almost unbearable.
6 months of this.
Yes. And she cited multiple instances where Shirilla was verbally and emotionally abusive toward Dominic. The crucial incidents, however, they occurred in July of 2022, just mere weeks before the fatal event.
And tell us about the most alarming of those July incidents, the one that explicitly tied her volatility to the vehicle itself.
This is a really chilling piece of evidence. During a major conflict in July, Dominic called his mother in extreme distress.
Okay.
Christine Russo She couldn't get there quickly enough, so she sent a family friend to intervene and pick him up. That friend later provided a statement.
And what did they see?
They claimed to have witnessed Shirilla in a complete fit of rage.
Yeah.
Just screaming at Dominic. But more damningly, the friend heard Shirilla explicitly yell, "I'm going to wreck this car right now."
Wow.
And while saying that, she was simultaneously making physical movements that appeared to be attempts to strike Dominic inside the vehicle.
That is just a staggering piece of precursor evidence. It directly connects her destructive intent to the specific instrument of death, the car. It establishes a pattern.
Precisely. It's not just a general threat of violence.
Yeah.
It's a specific one. And the sources also mentioned another video, also from July 2022, showing Shirilla threatening violence.
Yeah.
Specifically saying she would break into Russo's house during another heated argument.
So there's a pattern of escalation of threatening property and violence?
Yes. And when the defense later attempted to argue that the crash was a spontaneous mental blackout or a tragic loss of control, the prosecution just leveraged this documented history. They argued Shirilla had a documented playbook for responding to stress, and it was a destructive one.
So we establish a pattern of extreme emotional volatility, these explicit threats of vehicular harm, and the specter of an impending breakup, if we connect this to the motive.
Right.
The prosecution was painting a picture of a young woman losing control over the most important element in her life, the relationship, and resorting to the most destructive control mechanism she had previously threatened.
That is the essential link. But before we move on to the timeline of that morning, we really need to acknowledge the third party in the car, Davion Flanagan.
Davion Flanagan, 19 years old, he was just a mutual friend that morning.
Yes, simply a friend. The sources describe Davion as a former school athlete. His life trajectory had been challenging. He was adopted at the age of 8 by his guardian, Jamie Flanagan, after reportedly experiencing abuse related to drug use within his biological family.
So he had already overcome so much.
A great deal, and Davion was tragically just sitting in the backseat of the Camry that morning, completely uninvolved in the underlying romantic conflict that dominated the car's atmosphere.
His inclusion in this fatal ride just underscores the random, senseless tragedy of the event.
It really does.
So we have this volatile background, the history of threats, and the unfortunate presence of an innocent third party. This sets the absolutely chilling context for the final hours. Let's move to the last movements of the three individuals.
Okay.
Let's transition now into the final hours leading up to the crash. The source material, primarily derived from testimony and electronic data, gives a really detailed and time-stamped account of the evening of July 30th and the early morning of July 31st, 2022.
The trio's movements began around 10:15 p.m. That's when they attended a graduation party hosted by a friend of Shirilla's, Kelly Vrasha.
Okay, so a party.
Yes, but they didn't stay long. They spent less than an hour at that location. This initial stop provided an anchor point for the timeline.
And their primary destination for the night. Where did they go after that?
At approximately 11 p.m., they drove to the home of another friend, Paul Burlinghouse. The sources indicate this is where they spent the vast majority of the night. Listening to music and, critically, smoking marijuana, they remained there for over 6 hours, finally departing at 5:30 a.m. on the morning of July 31st.
6 hours. And that departure time, 5:30 in the morning, that became a central point of the prosecution's argument regarding preparation, didn't it?
It did. They later weaponized it as evidence of intent. The argument was that Shirilla deliberately waited for that quiet window when the roads would be empty.
But let's focus first on the vehicle's trajectory during the final moments. This is where it gets very, very specific.
The investigation relied heavily on CCTV footage gathered from the industrial park where the crash happened. And this data provided a stark contrast between the beginning and the end of the journey.
How so?
At 5:34 a.m., so only 4 minutes after leaving their friend's house, the front camera captured the Toyota Camry turning slowly at an intersection. The turn was described as, controlled, showing no signs of erratic driving or panic.
Normal driving, essentially.
Normal controlled driving. And then the picture changed entirely, all within 60 seconds.
Whoa.
Exactly 1 minute later, at 5:35 a.m., a second CCTV camera recorded the Camry. The key difference here was the acceleration. The car was moving at a drastically increased high rate of speed.
And there was another detail, a really crucial one.
Yes. The source material explicitly notes that the vehicle was speeding away with its headlights turned completely off.
Driving at high speed in the dark, just as the sun is barely starting to rise and deliberately turning the lights off, I mean, that detail alone profoundly changes the interpretation from a simple, tragic accident.
It absolutely does.
It suggests deliberate concealment or, at the very minimum, a total disregard for the safety of others or herself.
It was a huge red flag for investigators. The location they were speeding through was the Progress Drive Business Park near Pearl Road in Strongsville. It's an area characterized by large, often unoccupied buildings and quiet streets at that hour.
So not a busy freeway or residential street where you might lose control, a chosen location.
That was the argument, yes.
The speed cited in the sources is almost unbelievable given the structural impact.
It was calculated that the Camry was traveling at speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour when it struck the brick wall of a nearby business.
100 miles per hour.
The physics involved at that speed meant the impact was just not survivable for the passengers.
And the immediate aftermath reported by the sources, it speaks volumes about the sheer kinetic energy involved in that collision.
First responders were called to the scene, arriving about 45 minutes later. The devastation was extreme.
Oh, what did they find?
The sources include transcripts from body camera footage, quoting one responding officer who stated the car was literally split in two. Another officer, who was experienced in handling serious traffic fatalities, described the scene as the worst car crash they had ever witnessed.
That's horrific.
Truly. Dominic Russo, seated in the front passenger seat, and Davion Flanagan in the back, were both tragically pronounced dead at the scene due to the force of the impact.
And Shirilla, how was she found?
Shirilla sustained severe, life-threatening injuries, including multiple bone fractures. She was unconscious and required immediate airlifting to a major trauma center. However, a critical piece of physical evidence was noted by the first responders.
The accelerator.
Yes. When they accessed the wreckage, Shirilla's foot was still firmly pressing the accelerator pedal.
That sustained pressure on the accelerator pedal, even after the collision, became a powerful argument for the prosecution. It suggests a continued intentional action right up until the force of the crash made forward motion impossible.
Instead of the expected reflexive action of braking that any driver in panic would attempt.
Yes. The prosecution later utilized expert testimony to confirm this was consistent with deliberate, sustained acceleration. The absence of brake skid marks on the road surface preceding the wall also supported this.
This wasn't a failure to brake, it was a decision not to brake. And beyond the mechanical facts, the police made another important discovery during the initial processing of the scene.
The drugs.
They found a quantity of psilocybin mushroom and a digital scale in Shirilla's possession.
So, you establish a crime scene marked by extreme speed, deliberate concealment with the lights off, physical evidence of non-braking and sustained acceleration, and evidence of drug possession. All of this immediately pushed the investigation far beyond the typical scope of a tragic single-car accident.
The moment the investigation realized this was not a simple accident, that's the turning point in the legal narrative.
Initially, police considered tragic errors, poor driving, or even mechanical failure.
Which is standard operating procedure. A high-speed crash with fatalities requires ruling out every potential non-criminal cause. But those possibilities were systematically eliminated very early on.
So how is the mechanical failure theory definitively ruled out? That seems like a crucial point for the defense to challenge.
It was, and it was eliminated by bringing in a specialized mechanics expert to analyze the severely damaged 2018 Toyota Camry.
A forensic examination of the car itself.
A full forensic examination of the vehicle systems.
Yeah.
The sources detail this pretty clearly. The conclusion was crystal clear. The car was completely operational prior to the crash.
Nothing wrong with it.
Nothing. They confirmed the steering linkage was intact, the brake lines were functional, and the engine diagnostics showed no error codes that would suggest a sudden malfunction. This finding was a major blow to any defense argument claiming a mechanical accident.
With the car ruled out, the focus shifts entirely to the driver. Mackenzie Shirilla. What was her story when she was finally able to be interrogated?
Shirilla maintained that she had experienced a total blackout. She claimed she had absolutely no memory of the critical minutes leading up to and including the crash.
A total blank.
Total blank. However, by this point, investigators were moving rapidly toward the theory of intentional vehicular homicide. The prevailing motive, built on the evidence of the volatile relationship, was that this was a planned murder-suicide attempt.
And the trigger?
Instigated by Shirilla's fear that Dominic Russo was finally ending their tumultuous relationship for good.
This is the moment the case officially transformed from a traffic fatality into a murder investigation. And the sources repeatedly point to one piece of digital evidence that provided the necessary link for the element of planning.
The digital smoking gun. It was the GPS data extracted from her various electronic devices. This evidence was paramount in proving premeditation.
So what did it show?
The police successfully tracked her past movements and discovered that she had visited the specific industrial area, the exact crash site, 3 days before the fatal incident.
3 days before. So what's fascinating here is how a simple location ping 3 days prior transforms the legal categorization of the entire event.
It does.
It suggests reconnaissance, transforming a seemingly random act of speeding into a calculated choice of environment.
That's the entire weight of the prosecution's case on intent. In Ohio law, premeditation doesn't require months of intricate planning. It just requires that the perpetrator consider the act beforehand and took steps to prepare for it.
And the GPS data provided that decisive link.
It did. It suggested she had sought out and assessed a location suitable for a high-speed, fatal impact, a place with a solid, unmoving target, the brick wall, and minimal environmental risks like traffic or onlookers. The prosecutors successfully argue she was scouting for her mission of death.
Beyond this cold, technical evidence, the sources detail behavioral evidence gathered during her hospital stay that profoundly deepened police suspicion.
It did, and it was later used by the prosecution to argue an egregious lack of remorse. She was initially described as inconsolable when she learned of the deaths, but the sources say that facade quickly faded.
The change in behavior was striking.
It was. While recovering from multiple severe fractures, Shirilla became extremely active on her social media accounts. She was posting videos, even showing the interior of the medical ward.
From her hospital bed.
From her hospital bed. And perhaps most disturbingly, her social media popularity actually surged during her recovery. The sources note this period attracted significant interest, with modeling agencies apparently reaching out to her.
So it sounds as if she was leveraging the tragedy for social media capital, a boost to her own profile.
That interpretation was certainly adopted by investigators and prosecutors. And her content, it also grew increasingly callous. She posted satirical TikToks, one of which featured the quote, "I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die."
Wow. I mean, given the psilocybin found at the scene and the nature of the crash, that's...
The prosecution presented this as evidence of deep narcissism and a shocking detachment from reality.
But the act that finally pushed the victims' families to demand further action, that involved photos posted months later around Halloween.
Yes, this was the defining moment for the victims' families. She posted photos of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan dressed up as corpses for Halloween.
I can't even imagine seeing that.
For Davion Flanagan's sister Davion, this act of mockery or, profound disrespect was the final straw. Sources state that she urged her family to contact the police immediately, which just strengthened the investigative momentum against Shirilla.
So the police had successfully constructed a narrative combining a strong motive, the volatile relationship, fear of abandonment, the means, a fully operational car, and now conclusive evidence of planning with the GPS reconnaissance.
And the behavioral evidence that undermined any claims of accidental grief.
Exactly. This convergence of technical and behavioral evidence led directly to her arrest shortly after her discharge from the hospital. On November 4th, 2022, she was charged with a staggering 17 crimes,
including aggravated murder, felonious assault, and several counts related to the drug possession found at the scene.
The body camera footage from the arrest, which was released in 2025, that also became a point of contention regarding her emotional state. What did that footage reveal?
The footage initially shows Shirilla crying as the officers are placing her in handcuffs. It looks like a moment of distress. However, the subsequent segment, captured inside the police cruiser during transport, was specifically highlighted by prosecutors.
What happened in the car?
Sources note that she was seen closing her eyes and appearing to relax and compose herself once the immediate confrontation of the arrest was over.
So a very quick shift in demeanor.
A very quick shift. The prosecution argued this calculated shift, from performing distress to finding composure, was not the sign of a person consumed by accidental tragedy, but an indicator of a shocking lack of remorse and a very calculated nature.
The defense likely argued that was shock or exhaustion, but the prosecution successfully integrated that moment into the overall picture of control and planning. The narrative was complete. A calculated act, a mission of death, resulting from a desperate attempt to retain control over a relationship she knew was ending.
And that's the case they took to trial.
Moving into the trial phase, where all this evidence had to be presented and tested in a court of law, we find a crucial procedural decision made by the defense team.
That decision was to pursue a bench trial. Shirilla's lawyer, James McDonnell, opted for Judge Nancy Margaret Russo of the Cuyahoga County Court to determine guilt rather than relying on a jury of her peers.
That's a profound choice in a case this graphic and emotionally charged. Why would the defense choose a judge over a jury in a vehicular homicide case that had already been widely publicized and involved two very sympathetic victims?
Well, the sources suggest the defense strategy was to avoid the overwhelming emotional impact a jury might have experienced.
Right?
Hearing the testimony, seeing the gruesome evidence, a jury could be easily swayed by the sheer horror of the deaths and Shirilla's post-crash social media behavior. They might find it easier to convict based on feeling.
Whereas a judge is expected to be more clinical.
Exactly. A judge is typically expected to adhere strictly to the letter of the law and the precise legal definition of premeditation and intent. The defense likely banked on the judge finding the evidence of planning, specifically the GPS data, insufficient to meet the high bar of aggravated murder.
A huge gamble.
And ultimately, a risk that did not pay off.
The verdict, which was delivered on August 14, 2023, was comprehensive and crushing to the defense.
It was decisive. Shirilla was found guilty on a total of 12 felony charges. These charges included 4 counts of murder, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 2 counts of felonious assault, and counts related to drug possession and possessing criminal tools. Judge Russo accepted the prosecution's argument entirely. This was an intentional, deliberate act.
And Judge Russo's summary of the verdict and Shirilla's conduct was particularly memorable. It really framed the narrative for the media moving forward.
It did. The judge confirmed her finding that the actions were premeditated. She summarized the defendant's conduct with a very blunt assessment, calling Shirilla hell on wheels.
A phrase that immediately became shorthand for the case in public discourse.
It did. The legal reasoning was that the specific actions accelerating to 100 miles per hour, turning off the lights, failing to brake at a known target, demonstrated beyond a reasonable doubt a calculated lethal intent.
The sentencing phase followed swiftly on August 21, 2023. This is often the most difficult time in the courtroom, where you hear the full weight of the victim impact statements.
The gravity of the loss was articulated powerfully by the families. Davion Flanagan, Davion's sister, addressed the court. She stated plainly that she requested the longest possible sentence, arguing that Shirilla should never be allowed to harm anyone else.
And Dominic's mother?
Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, used her statement to directly confront Shirilla. She told her she should be thankful that she was still alive, emphasizing that Shirilla alone had escaped the lethal consequences of her own actions.
And what was the final sentence handed down by Judge Russo?
Shirilla received 2 concurrent life sentences. She received 1 life sentence for the murder of Dominic Russo and a second for the murder of Davion Flanagan.
Concurrent, meaning they run at the same time.
Yes, with the possibility of parole eligibility after she serves 15 years. The judge also imposed a permanent suspension of her driver's license.
So, barring successful appeals, she's scheduled for her first parole hearing in 2038. And the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office issued a statement reinforcing the conviction's basis.
They did. They strongly affirmed that the element of premeditation was proven. They elaborated on the specific timing, noting that Shirilla intentionally chose the 5:30 a.m. drive because the streets were demonstrably relatively quiet during those late night and early morning hours.
So that wasn't just convenience. They saw it as part of the plan.
Exactly. To ensure the catastrophic impact occurred without traffic interference or immediate witnesses who might have intervened.
Despite the definitive legal outcome, the legal challenges continued. Shirilla's defense team aggressively pursued the appeals process.
Their appeal strategy focused on 2 main prongs. The first appeal was filed on September 25, 2023. It alleged that the evidence presented, particularly the evidence related to premeditation, was insufficient to support the severity of the convictions.
Okay.
They also cited the presence of multiple clerical errors in the court record, which is a common tactic used to seek grounds for reversal. This initial appeal was denied in September 2024.
And did the defense elaborate on what they meant by insufficient evidence? What was the core of that argument?
The core of that argument, based on the source analysis, was that the GPS data showing reconnaissance 3 days prior did not meet the traditional standard of premeditation. They argued that they implied a cool reflection over a longer period.
So they were arguing for a lesser charge.
They suggested the actions were impulsive, chemically fueled, or the result of a sudden mental break. They were arguing for a conviction of, say, involuntary manslaughter instead of aggravated murder. The appellate court, however, confirmed that the evidence, including the history of threats and the actions during that final minute, the lights off, the sustained acceleration, was sufficient to prove a calculated intent to kill.
And what about the subsequent appeal attempt?
A second appeal was filed in April 2025. This attempt was summarily denied by Judge Russo, who ruled that the filing was untimely under procedural rules.
So multiple legal challenges all failing.
Yes. And despite these legal setbacks and the clear judicial findings, the sources note that Shirilla's family issued a public statement in May 2025, continuing to maintain their belief that the crash was unintentional and a tragic accident. It just highlights the deep, persistent schism between the judicial conclusion and the family's personal view of events. Shirilla remains incarcerated at the Ohio Reformatory for Women.
As with any high-profile criminal case involving young people, especially one with such severe consequences, the repercussions extended far beyond the walls of the courtroom. It impacted the community and captured national media attention.
In the immediate aftermath, there was a palpable sense of shock and grief in Strongsville. Friends and community members of Dominic Russo and Davion Flanagan established a small, spontaneous memorial near the crash site on Progress Drive.
A place for them to mourn.
Yes. These memorials, often consisting of flowers, photos, and candles, served as a crucial gathering point for collective mourning and support in a community just devastated by a senseless loss.
It's a small, poignant comfort that the victims' families channeled their immense grief into creating an enduring, positive legacy. I'm thinking particularly of the Flanagan family.
That is a powerful detail. Davion Flanagan's family established the Davion Flanagan Memorial Scholarship. The aim of this scholarship is deeply personal and reflective of Davion's own aspirations.
And what does it support?
It provides educational support to aspiring barbers. This effort ensures that Davion's name is permanently linked not just to tragedy, but to the hope of opportunity and vocational pursuit for other young people.
That's a wonderful tribute. The case naturally attracted massive scrutiny from media outlets focused on true crime and legal analysis, emphasizing its unique elements of digital evidence and behavioral contradictions.
The sources confirm extensive media coverage. The case was immediately recognized for its dramatic narrative arc from accident to premeditated murder. It was featured in major true crime series, including an analysis by Killer Cases in Season 4, and Court TV produced a focused documentary detailing the legal strategy of the prosecution.
And Investigation Discovery.
Yes. Investigation Discovery also developed a documentary feature on the case in 2025, which further cemented its place in the modern true crime canon. The media consistently highlighted the dichotomy between Shirilla's public persona and her private destructive actions.
This case wasn't just a local tragedy, it also became an example used in broader cultural commentary, drawing attention outside of the typical crime genre.
That's right. The source materials include a notable op-ed written by the Republican politician Armstrong Williams in 2023. He specifically utilized the graphic details of the Shirilla case to discuss what he perceived as a decline of traditional morality and values among certain segments of youth in the United States.
And we should be clear, we are strictly reporting on the content of the sources here, not endorsing any political viewpoint.
Absolutely. His argument was that her actions were symptomatic of a larger societal issue. He concluded that Shirilla's name would be etched into the annals of a society, struggling with its ethical foundations. It just demonstrates how quickly a local criminal case can be integrated into national cultural and political debates about generational norms and accountability.
The entire progression of this story, the volatile toxic history, the cold calculation of the route, the digital evidence establishing reconnaissance, and then the extremely public self-documented behavior post-crash, it provides a chilling illustration of how modern technology and social dynamics intersect with criminal intent.
If you look at the bigger picture, this case is fundamentally about proving state of mind. It serves as a stark modern example of how challenging it can be to establish premeditation when the primary means of death is a vehicle, which typically suggests accident or recklessness.
Right.
But the convergence of disparate evidence, the mechanical analysis ruling out failure, the prior documented threats of vehicular destruction, the GPS data proving planning, and the intentional timing of the crash on quiet streets allowed the prosecution to bridge that difficult gap.
and successfully argued that this was a targeted, calculated act of murder.
Correct.
And the digital footprint was not just a side note here, it was core evidence. Shirilla left behind evidence of her planning, and then, most shockingly, she used social media to document her life and express a callousness that was repeatedly used against her in court.
Those social media activities, including the mockery of the victim's memory, became the crucial character witness for the prosecution against her claims of accidental tragedy.
This raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider as you reflect on this case. In the modern age, when does the public documentation of personal life on social media transition from being casual content to becoming evidence of intent, state of mind, or lack of remorse?
And how should a judge or jury weigh those specific behaviors, like seeking modeling contracts or posting satirical memes after a fatal event, in the broader context of a judicial determination? It's a profound shift in how modern crimes are investigated and adjudicated, forever changing the meaning of digital accountability.
A deeply complex and truly disturbing case that forces us to re-examine the definition of intent. We sincerely appreciate you joining us for this examination of the source materials.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening.